This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Late Late Show, where I'm joined tonight by Lloyd Spridgen, a primary school teacher in Ipswich. And tonight, Lloyd and I will be exploring what life is like as an ITT and ECT teacher, hopefully giving you all some advice, tips and support to all new teachers, plus perhaps providing some awareness to mentors and senior leaders too.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
BBC News reports on GCSE results and the impact resits in English and Maths could have on post-16 providers. According to figures it has published on the news website, over 167,000 pupils in England received grade 3 or below in maths, whilst 172,000 failed English language. The number of pupils not achieving grade 4 in English language is highest for a decade. The Association of Colleges has estimated that the extra GCSE resits could cost around £16 million for the year, and highlighted the yo-yo effect the pandemic has had on resits, making planning a huge challenge. Julie McCulloch of Education Union Askell said resits were demoralising for students and reform of English and Maths qualifications was badly needed. Last year, only 20% of those retaking a Maths GCSE achieved grade 4 or above. The BBC also reported on GCSE pass rates in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as falling. The drop was steepest in England, but in Wales and Northern Ireland, grades were always meant to be higher. Analysis on the news website also indicates that in England, the gap between regions with lowest and highest proportions of GCSE passes, and that state schools had a steeper fall in pass rates than in private schools. Schools Week featured on A-level results and the widening attainment gap between North and South. According to data published on its website, the North East now has the lowest proportion of A star and A grades, lower than pre-pandemic levels, at 22%. At the same time, London and the South East have recorded the biggest rises when compared to 2019. Labour's Shadow Schools Minister said the results showed the failure of the government's levelling up agenda. The article discusses a range of factors which disparity across the best and worst performing regions, including existing long-term deprivation exacerbated by the pandemic, food insecurity made worse by the current cost of living crisis, and more usual factors such as attendance, device access and the use of catch-up schemes. Full details can be found on the Schools Week website. The Guardian also takes a look at academic outcomes for pupils, this time through the lens of those referred to social services during childhood. It states that data suggests these pupils are twice as likely to fail GCSE Maths and English than other pupils. Data from a 3-year period found 53% of teens who had been referred to social care did not achieve a grade 4 pass in both the GCSE subjects. This is in contrast to 24% in those not subject to a referral. The analysis was carried out by the charity Action for for children with a referral rather than just those who receive support. Around 318,000 children a year are referred to social care, although many do not meet thresholds to receive support. The Guardian also featured comments from school leaders on the impact high levels of absence and poor mental health of pupils have had on outcomes for some. Many cited a lack of formal support for pupils and their families, contributing to further strains on school staff as they tried to plug gaps usually filled by other services such as social care and the NHS. Following on from its examination of regional disparity in academic outcomes across different regions, we also reports on proposals for elite sixth forms being given the go-ahead. The Eton Star 16 to 19 free schools, a collaboration between Eton College and Star Academies, will open in Dudley, Teesside and Oldham. This is part of the 15 new free schools announced by government in the last week. The aim is to improve education standards and get more pupils from the North and Midlands to Oxbridge. The Sixth Form Colleges Association has, however, warned that more sixth forms could lead to existing high-performing provision being unnecessarily disrupted. Eton College will provide financial and extracurricular support through its partnership with STAR. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan commented on the 15 new schools, saying, "We want to make more good school places available to families." The 15 schools also include 2 new university technology colleges, the first to be approved in 5 years, and a Brit School North to be opened in Bradford. The sixth form sector has reacted to the new plans, saying that in the 55 education investment areas, there are already enough colleges and school sixth forms in the areas to meet need. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Late Late Show with myself, Ritchie, in what is my second show for Teachers Talk Radio. If you didn't catch my first episode with Tamlin Rose last week, please do go back and re-listen to the conversation where we explored which novels we would recommend to Key Stage 3 students in the subject of English. This week, I am pleased to say I'm joined by Lloyd Spridgen, a person I know extremely well after spending my primary school and secondary school years with. Lloyd is going into his 4th year of teaching and the first after becoming a fully qualified teacher after completing his ITT year and his ECT year 2 in July. Lloyd has taught a split class of years 5 and 6 and is now teaching a single year 5 class from September. Lloyd, thank you so much for joining me tonight in what is the final week of our 6 weeks holiday, he says with tears in his eyes. Firstly, how are you? And secondly, are you excited for the new academic year?
Hello, Ritchie. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah, loud and clear, buddy.
Perfect. I'm usually with technology, I'm not great, so I'm just happy to be here and talking to yourself. I'm good, really, really good. Congratulations on your new radio show, by the way. Last week I listened in, it was brilliant, and thank you for having me on this week as well. But no, I'm all good. I've had a really good 6 weeks. I moved into a new house a few months ago, so I've just been doing lots of gardening, and it's all good, all good.
Excellent. Yeah, busy 6 weeks then, moving into a new house and going into your first fully fledged year. So are you excited for the new academic year? Are you a bit anxious? I always the night before can never ever sleep. I think it's been the week before actually this time not being able to sleep. So how do you feel about moving into what is going to be your first full year, obviously without any sort of training or any sort of mentoring?
Yeah, no, quite excited. Obviously quite daunting as well. And I'm moving schools. So I've done my 2 years ECT now with Hoseley Primary School, which is an amazing rural primary school, about half an hour away from where I live. But I've decided to move schools this year, doing the single year group. So that's in itself presenting, excitement with new children, new staff, but also quite daunting there as well, because obviously it's again fully on my own in a whole new school. But no, overall, I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point really of tonight's show is revisiting both of our ITT years and ECT years and hopefully giving some advice to all new teachers, because it's the best profession, in the world. I say that to every single ITT who walks through the doors of any school that I've been at. It is literally the best profession in my opinion. It's something that is an absolute privilege to be able to do every single day. So it's always nervous going into a new job, and it's always nervous into going into new environments. But I mean, let's start from the beginning. what compelled you to get into teaching?
So it's something I've always been really interested in. I did try after university, after I left there, and it just didn't work out for one reason or another. I ended up working in children's publishing, and an opportunity came up when I left there several years ago now, and I applied for the skit course. I had my interview, got accepted, and haven't looked back since, really. And it was since having my two boys, seeing them grow and learn, and that really relit the fire to get back in. Well, to try again to get back into teaching, and thankfully it was third time lucky, and I'm over the moon. I made that choice now. It's been great.
Primary school, was there a particular reason? Was there anything that perhaps endeared you more to primary school teaching?
Yeah, so I would say I love the fact it can be quite challenging, but you have a wide range of lessons you teach across the whole curricula, and that excites me. I love learning as well as the children. So learning whether it's more about music and art. My particular passion is reading and writing. So English is one that I really enjoy teaching, but it's really, I find it really exciting to learn. Every single day about new subjects, and then obviously passing that on to the children. But primary school in particular, getting into that again, that was mainly because of becoming a father. And at that age, my eldest Charlie now is 8, and seeing him at that age, I think it's just a wonderful age where they're like sponges, aren't they? They just soak it all in, and it's an honour, isn't it? It's a privilege really to be part of that in their young lives. And yeah, I think it was always going to be primary school for me, I think.
Okay, awesome. We have listeners tonight who are going into their ITT year, who I'm sure will be feeling a whole host of emotions, excitement, nerves, anticipation, to name but a few. What were you feeling in the days leading up to before you started, and was there perhaps anything you did to help that feeling?
Yeah, so again, a bit like with the new school, the new opportunity coming up, a bit of excitement, a bit of nerves. A few questions of, am I, doing the right thing? Is this what I want to do? Because I think, it's a big decision, any career change, but certainly teaching. I think you need to really be passionate about it. But in terms of what things I did coming up to the start of the skit course, I would go running. That's a passion of mine. Spending time with my family, and just keep doing those things that sort of take your mind off, and just whether again it's watching films with your family or going for walks and things like that, and then just like I said, not try and overthink it really, because it is a really exciting opportunity. I know again it can seem quite scary, but it really isn't, and it's trying to turn it into a positive, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And to all of the listeners who are listening, please do call in and please do text in if you do have any of ITT or even ECT teachers. We are going to get on to a little bit of what leadership teams can do as well to perhaps help, which would be a really good exercise, I think, because, as a senior leader myself, I sometimes forget perhaps how daunting it is until I really think about it, ITTs might be feeling. And if there is something that teachers in that classroom or in the school can do, then please do call in and text in. Some really good ideas there. I remember that to try to get that feeling of anxiety away or pressure away, I personally used to exercise. I listen to music, and some really weird things is obviously, being a big fan of Liverpool Football Club, I used to go through the squad numbers in my head while I was trying to get to sleep, like who plays number 1, who's number 2, who's number 3. And if that didn't work, I'd go through the Premier League table and try and list all the Premier League teams. And if that didn't work, I'd go through all of the managers as well. And that's something like just to try to clear your head, try to demist everything that's going on in there. Because once you can see clearer, as you said, Lloyd, it's not that scary. Once you've got everything in order and once you've cleared your mind, I think that you're in a really good state, and hopefully that will help a couple of people out. Now, as you know, I'm a secondary school teacher, and one of the first things that I remember about my ITT year was actually the first 2 weeks I had was at university, and the amount of people who enrolled on the course, it must have been between 60, 70 people. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, this is going to be amazing, meeting all of these people and having all of this like networking base that we can, support each other, we can bond and help each other, and perhaps more importantly, vent to each other. And then we were asked to go into different rooms. One room was for primary school, this big lecture room, and one for secondary school, again, another big lecture room. And as I walked into the secondary room, for all subjects, by the way, not just English secondary, only 13 followed. Now, out of 60, 70 people, only 14 of us was there for secondary school training. All the rest were primary. And for me, that completely blew my mind. I could not believe how many ITTs were primary school ITTs. Now, I actually became quite good friends, and we had a really solid group of 14 people, and formed a cool little unit where we did, vent and support and help each other. But for you, in that primary school setting where there is, in my experience, a lot more, did you have a similar experience? Were you able to group up with people, share people's experiences?
It's kind of, kind of a funny question, that one, because it's sort of a yes and no, to be honest, because unfortunately, so my skit year started September 2020. So sadly, earlier that year is when COVID first came about. So we had a cohort of about 30 others on the course. I think there was probably about, I want to say there was about maybe 60 primary skit training teachers, but they'd split them into various cohorts. So there was 30 in mine. But because of the restrictions, we weren't able to meet in person. All of our lectures up until the following May was all remote and online. So that was quite a struggle, to be honest. But we did have a WhatsApp group set up straight from the off in September of 2020. And we did do various Zoom calls early doors to sort of introduce ourselves and get to know one another. And that did really help. And we had that group, that WhatsApp group, for that whole entire year. And that did bring us, all quite close together, I feel, like I said, in what was a very difficult time. But then when May came about, we were able to go for those last sort of few weeks of the course and meet in person at various lectures and seminars. And that was really nice, seeing all these people that you've been on this journey with. But yeah, it was definitely something I would recommend, whether now you have those groups you can meet in person, build those relationships, get those numbers, because those people, and like in your case, friends, or lifelong friends you can make there, they will get you through. So definitely draw down on that.
Yeah, so I mean, that must have been completely surreal, really, for you to go through that, because my university days were every Monday. So as well as the first 2 weeks, we had every Monday in university. And I remember those Mondays, everyone dreads the Mondays, don't they? But actually those Mondays for me, even having to drive from Peterborough to Northampton, because my university was at Northampton for teaching, I actually didn't mind those Mondays, getting up at 5 a.m. and having the drive over there, and then all the things that I was perhaps anxious about, I spoke to my friends, I spoke to, my mentors there. And by Tuesday, I was raring to go. I had everything all ready and set out to go. I mean, you obviously didn't have that, but, did you find still that support network in there? Or actually, did you feel that you would have benefited perhaps slightly with actually people and talking to people, bouncing ideas off each other as well in person?
Yeah, it's a strange one, that one. I feel like overall we did pretty well. I think, given the situation, I think with the WhatsApp group we had, there were like subgroups that came out of that as well, depending on certain presentations we had to work on in smaller groups. And, I think we did, as a cohort, do really well just to pull together and be resilient in what was a very strange and very horrible time for everyone. And, we all sort of were able to come out of that the following sort of May of 2021 and see one another. And it was strange, but again, it was really nice to see these people, albeit towards the end of that journey. I think what was strange for me, I was so used to seeing them as a tiny box in the corner, and meeting them for the first time, it was like they've got arms, they've got legs, they look completely different to how you imagine it. It's sort of, you're just so used to, like I said, a tiny little screen. And yeah, it was just quite a really nice experience a year on to kind of sort of shake hands and say well done, and we're nearly there, and sort of share those experiences. but yeah, no, there was some amazing. Just to quickly add, Richie, there were some amazing lecturers and mentors. So I did my skit through Essex and Thames primary skit, and our lecture times were remote 10:30 to 2, all on Zoom, and so it was condensed down. But some of the stuff they did, just to, bearing in mind we were at home, there's so many things I didn't realise you could do with household items, and before you know it, you're running around, you're grabbing vinegar, bicarb soda, and food colouring, and then I'm having to explain to Alex, my wife, why I'm doing a science lesson, and I've turned the living room carpet red because it's gone everywhere. But they did amazing with what they had at their disposal. So, and I think we all benefited from that, really.
I really like what you said about the WhatsApp groups, actually. And if there are anybody going into ITTs, please do make sure that you network with people. And WhatsApp is such a great, I'm sure all of us use it, but it is actually such a great form of communication. And, as well as what the world is now with Teams on as well as Zoom, etc. One of my big advices is actually collaborate with these people who you are basically in the foxhole with. And do make sure that you set up, these group chats, because, you're all in it together. There is nobody better than you there. You are all in the same boat. And, just make sure that if you have any questions is to ask each other. That's the first bit of advice, really, I think Lloyd and I are trying to get across to everybody. Speaking about mentors, actually, my university mentor, a man called Gareth Davis, who I generally still hold so dear to my heart, because he was so inspirational, kind, caring, and just so supportive. And Gareth played a massive role in my first year of teaching, because if there were any questions, he was the person that I would want to go and talk to, because it was completely non-judgmental. It was a really safe spot. He was a university lecturer, so he was away from the school that I was at. And, things happen, and obviously people drift apart. I generally don't think I've spoken to him since graduation, which was, probably 6 months after my ITT year. So probably a good 9 years now. And I really do wish he's doing well, but I would not be in the situation that I am if it wasn't for him. Did you experience that with your mentors? You already touched upon it, but I suppose, excuse me, I suppose by being in COVID during those times, what was it like? Did you have one-to-one experience with your mentor? Did you have sessions, or did you have, activities where it was just you two where you could talk? How did that work for you in COVID?
Yeah, so I had for my skit year and my ECT years, I've had all male mentors, and I've had my first chap, Matt Wills, was really, really good, especially in your first placement from September to Christmas in term one. And some of the advice that was shared, it was still, despite COVID, I was able to go in and teach, trying to build up towards, I think it was 25% of timetable looking back now. But he was brilliant for advice that was shared and helping me with my lesson planning just before Christmas, before your skit mentors come and observe you, which if I look back now, I think some of those were done over Zoom as well. So that was quite strange. So I was having to teach to the class, but with a laptop at the back with the, whether I think it was Zoom at the time, because unfortunately, because of COVID, from the skit, no one was allowed to come into the school. So that was slightly strange, sort of teaching to the class and effectively to a laptop at the back where someone on the other end is sort of taking notes. You can't really gauge how it's going, can you, from a laptop screen, whereas someone standing at the back, slightly different. But no, he was brilliant. And then from terms 2 and 3, I had a chap called Robert Hopegood in a small rural primary school, and that was a split 5-6, and he was brilliant as well, just with sharing all his experience. And I think we've touched on here, it's the questioning, isn't it? If you don't ask, you don't know. And both of those mentors were brilliant for just saying straight from the off, if you've got any questions, do ask. And I certainly did. And I think over time it does make you a far better practitioner, because you can just draw on all that experience. So I've had those two. And just to quickly add, in my ECT years, I've had a fantastic chap called Mr. Patterson, Duncan Patterson. He has been amazing in every aspect. And I feel like, when it got sort of tough in my first year of teaching, he really sort of held me together, whether it's making me a cup of tea, getting me a biscuit, just keeping me sane. And, his advice over the last 2 years it's been amazing, really. So, again, a sort of shout out to him, because he has really helped a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important, and I will touch on this a bit later, but your university mentors are so important because, as I said, they're non-judgmental. They are just there to support you. They have no real affiliation with the schools that you're in. So again, it's not as if you're going to complain about a school to like your actual mentor, and then you're a bit fearful about that because it might get back to whoever it might get back to. These guys are completely neutral, and for me, another piece of advice for all ITT and ECTs listening is to absolutely make sure that you try to, grab every single nugget of information from these people, because they have such a wealth of knowledge and they generally care about the profession of teaching, I believe anyway, because that's what they're there for. And, creating a really good atmosphere and a really good relationship with those people, in my experience, has always been, integral. And after my first year, being an ITT, I went on to be an NQT. So I didn't have that 2-year support program that the ECTs do. And I think that 2-year is so much better, because I know that after I came out of my NQT year, I almost didn't feel ready to have like all support like wiped away from me. And that to me was far more daunting than actually, my NQT year was, because I always knew I had that base of support in there. For my first day, I, as I mentioned, worked about an hour and a bit away at a school in Wellingborough. So I had a bit of time to get my head straight in the car journey over there, although I'm not sure that was a good thing or a bad thing. There's so many thoughts. But I remember being so anxious about meeting the staff and making sure that I made the first right impression. And I think I was more apprehensive about that, about meeting the staff and meeting my future colleagues, than I was being within, a classroom full of 30 students. At first, what were your initial thoughts walking into that classroom on the first morning, and what advice would you give to anybody else who's about to experience that next week?
So, like you've mentioned there, just trying to relax, and not necessarily worrying and being sort of head up on making those relationships with the staff as such, because that will come over time. You've got your staff room visits and your breaks and lunches, and those relationships will form over time. But I think it's just focusing sort of on your class in hand. Obviously, if you've usually you get a handover with your mentor, or you get an introduction, don't you, a few days before. And so that sort of breaks the ice, which is quite nice if you've had that opportunity. And just going back to just quickly, Ritchie, what you said, a point about obviously using these mentors and drawing on their experience, and they've been there, seen it, done it, got the T-shirt. I think also it's all staff, isn't it? It's the TAs as well, and especially depending on what class you're going into, the TAs they're a godsend, aren't they? They're fantastic, and it's making sure you're asking them, about certain children and dynamics in the class, and those little snippets of advice, and did I do this okay, and what would you recommend? Because they've been there in that classroom longer than yourself in the first instance, and they're really useful as well. But I would say just not to overthink it. Try and turn those nerves into sort of real nice bubbly excitement, because you're going to do something amazing, and just seeing those children's faces for the first time, your nerves will just wash away. Definitely, it's brilliant when that first meet and greet happens with your class. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice, is using your TAs. And I always say to any new staff as well who walk through the doors, make friends with your TA, make friends with the cleaners, make friends with the IT guys, and make friends with site team. They should be your first 4 people that you make friends with, or first 4 groups of people that you make friends with, because you will definitely need them every single day. So again, all ITTs and ECTs, they're your people you want to go and talk to, because you definitely will need their help at some point. So again, TAs, such a wealth of knowledge in terms of when it comes to the students, about what works well with students, about what group dynamics, as you quite rightly said as well, works well. So definitely, again, make sure that you are talking to those people too. So you've walked into the classroom. I mean, one of my first lessons, I was thrown right in at the deep end, year 11s. So, 16-year-olds. And whilst I'm, almost double their age, it's still quite a daunting experience. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that I was by any means intimidated by year 11s, but that these are the cats with the attitude, perhaps, and these are the cats that have seen it and done it all. How did you feel walking in on that first day? What sort of emotions were you feeling on the first morning with the actual students, since you've done your 2 days of training?
So how it happened, or how it transpired from the start of my course was going into school. So that was sort of day one for me. And I'll be honest, it felt like I was back at school myself in some respects. You get all those nerves bubbling away and things like that. But then Matt was great, sort of introducing himself in person, getting me into the class, having a walk around the class and obviously the overall school. You have your meets and greets with various staff as you're going around as well. And then when the kids come in, my first part of the morning was just literally sitting down and going around and building those relationships and finding out, their names, obviously, what they like, what they don't like, whether that's about school or outside of that, and just, building those relationships early doors. And I think that was really good, a good way of doing it, because it sort of breaks the ice between you and your class that you are going to be building up to teaching considerably before Christmas. So I think doing that to start with was a really good way, because it definitely helped build up my confidence, rather than just being told, this is Mr. Spridgen, he'll be teaching you at some point, and then being thrown in the deep end of a few days later. It was sort of really nice just to go and start building relationships with in your.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, actually, because in my first 2 weeks, I was just observing, like purely observing in the first 2 weeks. And I think what you could easily do, and I perhaps did in the first maybe day or two, was just sit, make notes, take everything in, absorb everything. But actually, what was far more beneficial what I did find was actually going around and talking to the students, not only building relationships, but actually seeing how they learn. Again, questions that new ITTs or ECTs could ask for new groups is, whatever the teacher's doing, like, is this a good way for you to learn? Is this, what is it that you're learning? How are you learning this? And then you're making that conversation, not just, about anything personal, but you're making that conversation and also in your head thinking, okay, well, these students learn this way. And that's a really good connection to have. So again, really, really good advice. So you've been in the role for a few weeks, of which I assume, as I mentioned, was observing lessons in teaching. Was that right? The first couple of weeks in your placement, perhaps?
Yeah, pretty much observing lessons, taking notes, and then sort of building up towards teaching a part of a lesson myself independently. Yeah.
Okay, so after that, then you've been handing the reins, as you've mentioned, and doing perhaps little parts of lessons. So in my day of teacher training, we had starters and plenaries. Nowadays, we have sit-down activities, silent starts, lesson postcards, and many, many more. But essentially, teaching smaller parts of the lesson. How was the first few lessons that you did?
Yeah, they felt okay. I'm probably if I had an out of body experience, probably not. But I know I struggled, and I still do. I'm happy to admit that. There's no shame in this, with my time management. Depending on what I'm teaching, I'm not sure if you share this, Ritchie, but I get so absorbed in stuff, and if I'm really passionate about it, I can waffle, and before you know it, it's like 15 minutes has gone, and I'm like, we need to get on task, because it's going to be break time soon. So I think where I struggled personally the first couple of times teaching was time management. But again, Matt was great at sort of feeding that back. And sometimes it yourself, don't you? Because you're looking at those kids' faces, and their brains are just slowly melting before you, and you realise, I need to sort of get these children on task. Their attention span, particularly at that age, is limited. So but you learn. That's what it's all about. And I think, I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but I with hindsight now, I would have not put so much stress on myself to kind of feel like I need to know everything and cover everything. It's sort of just sometimes just get in and get out and then evaluate how the lesson was after then. But yeah, no, time management was a tricky one for me to start with, and behaviour management as well. I think because it wasn't my class, and you're coming into it, aren't you? Slowly building up, and it is strange when you're teaching someone else's class, and that's one thing I've noticed since qualifying, that it is so much different. But yeah, again, you just you've started to know their names, you start to know what they respond to, and you start to find your style as well. So it's a really nice time in your early teaching career where you're learning a lot about yourself as well. So I would again flip that into a positive and think about forget about it being your first couple of times teaching, and how that might be quite scary, but flip it and think, well, actually it's quite exciting. I see if I'm a teacher that sort of needs to raise my voice more, if I do more verbal nods and stuff like that, and you really find out a lot about yourself as well as the children. So it's quite good, I think.
Yeah, I mean, time management, I think, with the two things that you said there is perhaps something that 90% of teachers would struggle with in their first couple of lessons, because that time management, you can plan whatever you like, but if certain students have questions that, quite frankly, need to be answered about the subject, then you need to answer them. And 5 or 10 minutes could have gone, and then your plan has sort of been kiboshed, but actually in a good way. So if people are listening and people are struggling with time management, at the minutes that you think, I should have spent 15 minutes on that, but I ended up spending 25, well, actually, was that extra 10 minutes worth it? Because if it was, and the students gained something from it, then it's not a waste. And if you didn't do a plenary, or if you didn't get quite to the end of the lesson, and again, I'm not saying make a habit of it, but sometimes it's okay to go over. It's okay to explore whatever it is that you needed to explore in the next lesson, because you can't plan for everything. So the pace of the lesson, as long as it is still pacey, it's one of those that if students need to know something, it's never a waste of time. Because if they need to know something to help them progress, either in life or in the subject, then that can't be a waste of time. And again, your behaviour management, I think every single September, lots of students will try to maybe, say, okay, well, we've got new teachers this September. Let's just see what, subliminally we could do. And, it is one of those that all new teachers, and existing teachers do fret about that behaviour management, but you've just got to be clear, you've got to be consistent, and you've got to stay strong with your beliefs as well. And I do think lots of behaviour management, as you quite rightly said, starts with building the relationships of the students. Once you've got a relationship with the students, your behaviour management becomes non-existent, really. You just have to be consistent, because the students know what to expect of you, and you know what to expect with those students. So as long as your boundaries are clear, hopefully everyone's behaviour management should fall into place as well. I mean, what tips would you give yourself then in hindsight? Because we did mention about hindsight. What would you go back and say, actually, I know that you said don't stress too much about everything, and that is wonderful advice. Is there anything else that you would perhaps tweak in there, or is that enough, really?
I would definitely say the biggest bit of advice I could share is don't feel like you need to know everything. Even now, I think, certainly from my point of view, going into that skit year, I felt like if I was teaching that English lesson or that maths lesson, I felt like I had to be like if it was maths, like Carol Vorderman, and just know it all off the back of my hand. And I think that's impossible, especially, again, for me and my experience at primary, where you're having all these different subjects thrown at you quite quickly, and particularly after Christmas. And don't be afraid to just take a deep breath and realize, I don't know everything. That's completely natural. And actually sometimes, and you'll learn this over time, sort of pushing it back on the children. And if they ask you a question, and you're not sure of yourself, well, how do you think we could find that out? What resources do we have? And they might mention, obviously, if they've got iPads or dictionaries, or any other textbooks in the class. You might see if anyone else knows and open it up to the rest of the class. But I think in my first few months of my skit year, I felt like I had to just know the lesson inside out. And that, again, is just impossible. So, my biggest advice there is please, please, please do not worry that you don't know every every little bit of your subject, because that's also the beauty of the job we do. You learn it over time, and I think that's what makes it so exciting and such a rewarding career, because you're always learning, and obviously your teaching style's changing as well over time as you pick up different snippets of information. So that's one thing I'd definitely say. So don't put too much pressure on yourself thinking you need to know it all. Again, I think we've mentioned about asking lots of questions, not just to your mentors, but to wider school staff as you build up those relationships. And coming out of that as well, outside of your day at school, if there's anything that helps sort of take your mind off, whether that's running, time with your family, going for a walk, walking the dog, reading, anything like that. And when I say reading, something away from the course, I would definitely recommend that, just to give you a little bit of a mental break, really.
The role of the mentor, in my opinion, and we've both touched on this, really is absolutely vital in any ITT's career, perhaps in fact the most important part. And I was so fortunate to have a wonderful mentor who I still say to this day is one of the best teachers I've ever seen teach, called Claire Williams, who without her, I'm certain I wouldn't be where I am today. She was just so thorough. She always made me question, every single aspect of my lesson, as in, how could I have made it better and what worked? And it wasn't a continuous barrage of you should do this and you should do that. It was actually getting me to think. And I think, advice when it comes to having that mentor and having that relationship, because you do need a relationship with your mentor, is again, take on board what it is that they're saying. Don't be too defensive. And, I remember so many times the dreaded question, well, how do you think that went? And for me, it was a dreading question, because you don't ever want to be too harsh on yourself, because you don't want to necessarily say, oh, I'm really bad and rah-de-rah, or I should have done this better. You have to actually own what you've done really well. And I would say to everybody listening, think about the positives just as much as you do the negatives, because if you were like me, you might think about the negatives, that 5 minutes, where actually what you did was fine, but this is what could have made it better. And you're not thinking about the other 50 or 55 minutes that actually went really well. So again, everybody listening, please do focus on those positives. You spoke about your mentor as well. How much of an impact did they have on your career?
So, huge. I think certainly helped get me through that skit year, both Matt and Robert, who I've mentioned. Again, just being really supportive, really constructive with any feedback. And again, you do sometimes feel like you take it on board. And you sometimes can, but they're doing it because they want you to improve. And they're, whether it, in my case, might have been time management. And then when you're driving back home, like you mentioned, sometimes a drive can be a good or a bad thing, but then you can start analysing it, and you're like, actually, no, they're saying this stuff because they're right. Actually, that lesson did take a little while to get onto task, and I completely, now agree with their feedback. So they were both really fantastic for that. And then in my ECT years, the 2 years just gone, Duncan's just again been really good. Aside from the platform that we have to use each week, which sets the targets and the reading behind it and all the pedagogy, he's just been brilliant, just in terms of when it's school finished and if it's making me a cup of tea or a coffee, and he knows that maybe that I need a bit of a perk up, grabbing a biscuit, having a chat and saying, how was your day? And then just sharing his advice. I've got so much from that. And it's thanks to him that, I'm, still teaching, because, in those first couple of years, it can feel quite tough, and you do need that support network. It's not just Duncan, the whole staff at Hoseley have been fantastic as well. And I think, if you get a good mentor, then you have lucked out, and it is, draw down on them. And Duncan has been brilliant for that. Even, lesson planning, sharing advice, sharing resources, all of that stuff. I've been really, really fortunate. So I'm, really pleased, very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, on lesson planning, Claire used to say to me, send it 24 hours in advance. She'll look over it with any
Yeah.
improvements that you can make and ping it back. Again, to everybody listening, if your mentor is willing to do that, absolutely 100% take that offer, because again, you know, even just Claire looking, which I'm sure would have taken her quite a long time, looking through my lesson plans, which were like a ridiculous 2,000-3,000 words long for like a 50-minute lesson, because that's what you do in an ITT year. You know, even just her sending it back to me and me redoing it before that lesson was, again, just so beneficial. So again, I would definitely recommend, if your mentor is willing to do that, you take their advice. Thank you so much, Lloyd, for all of your advice and tips so far. I think, as we've said too, the most important thing in teaching and perhaps life is that if you're not sure of something, then ask. We both said it. It shows signs of strength to ask for help, not weakness. And something I've always said to my ITTs who I've mentored in the past and who have been in either my department or as, you know, head of English or assistant principal, because if you don't know, how are you supposed to if you don't ask?
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
So you've finished your ITT year, and if you were anything like me, perhaps patted yourself on the back around June, July time, thinking that year was perhaps the most rewarding, difficult, exhilarating, exhausting, enigmatic year of your life. But you know what you're doing now. You can teach. And so you go on to your ECT year one and off you go, only to find out, for me, undoubtedly, that this ECT year is actually going to be much harder than your ITT year ever was. I mean, was that the same for you?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think, I don't know if I felt that prepared for it. I don't know, maybe I was so naive. I felt like maybe it would be a little bit easier, but only marginally. But no, absolutely, it was like falling off a cliff edge a little bit. And there'd be days where I'd be walking back to the car park at Hoasley, and I'd be like, oh, that was such a good day. I feel like, you know, the kids learnt loads, you know, I'm brilliant. I know how to do this already. This is great. I don't see what all the fuss is about. And then the next day I'll be walking back through that same car park. Oh my God, you know, how am I a teacher or, you know, ECT teacher? I feel like I'm stealing a living. And, you know, once the parents find out I'm such a fraud, and you just have these like multitude of emotions. One day you felt like you were doing really well. The next you felt you weren't. And because, you know, it comes at you thick and fast. And that was quite a struggle to deal with. But I think, you know, once it settled down after a few weeks and I could take a big deep breath, you know, the network I had around me, I mentioned Duncan already. I had a fantastic TA, chap called Ed Messer last year. And he used to be a secondary school teacher as well. So I was very lucky to be able to draw on his experience, and you know, that helped get me through as well. But no, you are right. It is definitely harder than your training year, but it's only going to get better. And you know, if you've got a good network around you, you find over time that it starts improving. And before you know it, the year is gone. You take a big deep breath again, like your skit year, and you're like, actually, no, I can do this. I've just done year one. And now with the extra year ECT, like you said, the extra year, you have that as well, just to give you that little bit of extra support and mentorship. And I'm hoping that will help, you know, not only just get more people into teaching, but retain them as well by having that extra year's guidance. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my ECT year was called an NQT year, and it only lasted 1 year. And essentially, I just had, instead of a lesson observation, I mean, I had feedback in my ITT year after every single lesson, which was great. But I also had a teacher in that class for every single lesson as well. So I was never on my own. But my NQT year, I had like one meeting with my mentor a week, which was all about an hour. And then I probably had one lesson observation every 2 or 3 weeks. So I went from complete support to just not too much support. And, for me, that was the difficulty. It was like, well, am I doing this right? Like, am I okay? And it's that self-doubt like that you mentioned, really, and almost that imposter syndrome that thinks, oh no, like I just want to do a good job. But again, it's speaking to people, as you've said. So that extension, I believe the ECT years is such a positive move that it is now extended to 2 years. I mean, I obviously didn't go through the second year ECT. So for anybody listening who's an ITT or first year ECT, or maybe even going into their second year ECT, how did your second year work in terms of workload? Was it an increase of the previous year at all?
So I feel like the ECT program, it felt the year just gone quite repetitive. It's very similar to year one. You look at your behaviour management, your pedagogy, and your subject knowledge. But I think because you know, in hindsight now, I think doing it again and doing very similar targets, which again, Duncan and I would do on a weekly basis, I think that does help them build up your confidence, because you know you can do it. You did it last year, and you're just doing it again, just with, just building on your teaching style. So, I think, having that extra year, and then also having that opportunity still to have those chats with your mentor, and getting all that guidance is really useful. You're still off timetable. It reduces slightly. So in year one, you get 10% as a year one ECT, and then I believe it drops down to 5% for year two. But I think roughly that works out to be another hour or so. So you still get that extra hour's time to, go off and check resources, do your ECT program, and any tasks that you've been set, and again, reading up on pedagogy, which is really useful still. So I think it was overall good to kind of, again, you're going through the same motions as year one, but I think because you've done it, you get a chance to do it again even better, and that helped really build up my confidence, which I thought was great.
Yeah, I mean, I recall quite a lot of my lesson feedbacks, and fortunately, a lot of them were very, very positive. But actually, it was quite humbling at times to think, I know that lesson wasn't good, so I really don't know what my mentor was going to say. And obviously, they reflect that. And actually, it's quite humbling to go, okay, well, listen, I don't know everything, and that again is perfectly fine. So for everybody listening who might have a bad lesson, we all do. And it's about reflecting on that bad lesson and not letting it beat you down, because I can guarantee that if you teach one bad lesson in that day or week, you constantly think about that one bad lesson as opposed to all of the good ones that you've taught. And, it's about trying to move forward with a strong and supportive team, but also move forward positively in your own mind too. What advice would you give to senior leaders then? Because I don't want senior leaders to think, this podcast or this radio show is all about ITTs and ECTs, because it's absolutely not. I've mentioned several times actually that, being a senior leader, I try to place just as much of my time on ITTs and ECTs, because they are going to be the future outstanding teachers once you feed them everything that it is that they need to know. So is there any advice that you'd give to maybe senior leaders or even ITT and ECTs in terms of senior leaders?
So very similar to what you said, really. I would say, just as an overall, maybe not completely leaving it to the mentor that they've assigned to the ECT. Obviously, they themselves dropping in, having those chats, and maybe checking in on the target that their ECT is doing that week. Maybe sharing their own advice, because obviously they've been there and done it as well. It can be quite daunting as well, but if you as an ECT are happy with that, maybe they could come alongside your mentor as well, and obviously observe when they've got the time, and be part of that sort of journey as well, because obviously they've taken you on, they've seen something in you, and obviously you want to have those opportunities to show them what you can do, and obviously off the back of that then get their advice as well, because obviously two people telling you how well you've done and where you can improve is better than one, isn't it? So
yeah, I remember when I was in my NQT year actually, and the assistant principal came into one of my lessons and just stood. I didn't know they were coming in. Just stood at the back of the classroom for about 15 minutes. I thought they're either waiting to speak to me because I've done something wrong, or they're waiting to speak to a kid because they've done something wrong. So I just kept going, obviously, and then they walked out. So I thought, well, okay, well, I don't know really what's going on there. And they caught me in the canteen and just said, oh, I want to say, really well done for that lesson, rah. And that to me felt like that was, as good as winning the lottery, because for a senior leader to come over to me and make a point of it in front of my peers and my colleagues and my mentor and say that I did a good job, that meant a lot to me. So I try to go into ITT's lessons and offer them support, but also if there was something good in there, I absolutely make sure that I tell it to them as well, because as you've said, these people have invested in you. And there should not be a hierarchy in a school. Like I've always said that there should never be a hierarchy. There should never be an us and them. But actually, these are the people that you want giving you a pat on the back. So my advice, to senior leaders would be actually to make sure that you go and say well done to them. Did anyone do that to you? What sort of impact did it have, or would it have had, on you if that would have happened?
Yeah, no, I've had that happen quite a lot. So my previous head, a lady called Sarah, it's actually her birthday today. Happy birthday, Sarah. She was great. She would come in as well, and similar to yourself, really, just observe and then just, give you live feedback sometimes if once they're on task, the children, maybe just putting you aside and saying, you know what, I really, really like this. And, why did you do this? And what do you think you could do differently next time? And just having those chats and in the moment as well was really good, because then you could put it into practice and think, right, well, actually, once Sarah's gone, I'll obviously try the strategy she's just maybe shared with me and see if that works. And then obviously, inevitably it did. And then you can then feed that back in the staff room later that day and be like, oh, great, thank you for that, because I did do what you said. And, it worked really, really well. And so, and then you feel part of that wider team, don't you? Again, I think it was really important, and completely agree with what you said about there shouldn't be any hierarchy there. You're all one team with the same goal, which is the children at the heart of it. So I think the overall leadership in terms of NQTs, ECTs, it's making them feel all a part of that. So yeah, and I was very fortunate as well with that too.
That's a good point as well. Make sure that if they do give you anything as well, is go back and have that conversation. Oh, I tried this and this is what happened. And even if it didn't go to plan, it didn't quite go to plan here. So what else do you think I could do? Because again, it's building that positive relationships within people in school, within experienced people in school, and just drawing and eking out every single bit of knowledge that is possible. So again, really, really good tips. I'm going to hand you some quick fire questions then.
Sure thing.
And answer obviously honestly as you can, but we're just going to do a quick round here. So they are quite hard questions, so I will allow you obviously some thinking time.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
What was your hardest part of your training? What was the hardest part of your training?
Okay, so I would say coming into term 3 after Easter, touch and go on my skit course, because I was still struggling with my time management. So that was a difficult time, with my family as well. It's like, got to see this through, got to pass the course because I need to get a job and, I've got bills to pay. And so that was a tough time. But again, I asked the questions, I stayed positive. And in my heart of heart, if you apply everything you've been taught, you can do it. And yeah, that was very difficult, but came through it, thankfully passed my skit. And yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. But always believe in yourself, and when the chips get down as well, you'll soon know whether you want to be in this job or not. And if you want to be in this job, you'll find the way to make it work. Absolutely. You have 2 young boys and a wife at home, and this job is so demanding and time consuming, especially as an ITT or ECT. What advice would you give in balancing your work-life balance to ITT and ECTs? Yeah,
do you know what, Ritchie? That's a great question, actually. That's a really great question. I will be honest, I think I struggled with this year 1 with the work-life balance a lot. I would do, certainly in the first few months, a lot of midnight finishes, a lot of books being brought home, which if there's time, I would advise not to do any of that now. But I would say live marking. Try and mark when you're in school, get it done and out of the way. Try and do as much as you can in the morning if you're going early, and stay late and get it done at school. And as soon as you leave school, that's it, done for the next day. Get your resources printed, go home, be with your family, and don't try not to think about school if you can the rest of the evening. That's what I'd say there, definitely.
Any advice you'd give to mentors?
Have those chats, regularly with your ECTs, like Duncan, if you can. If they make those teas, make those coffees, they do help. They are appreciated. Maybe throw in a biscuit as well, because we, speaking for myself, I do like a biscuit. So, just having informal chats as well. I think those after school ones and at lunchtime ones, they go a long way as well. So I'd say that.
And finally, for all runners, etc., I noticed on your profile picture that you ran and completed the London Marathon this year. So massive congratulations for doing that. I'm running it next year. So any London Marathon tips or advice?
Yeah, I would say biggest bit of advice, just enjoy it. Don't, be het up on a time as such or anything like that. Enjoy it, because the crowds are amazing. The views are amazing. I finished off running behind Forrest Gump. So I heard for the last 5 minutes, run, Forrest, run. So I couldn't help but smile, through gritted teeth after 25 miles, but just enjoy it. You've worked hard for it, or you will have. It's your moment to sort of put it into practice. So enjoy it. Definitely.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today on this edition of the Late Late Show. As a friend, it's always a great moment to catch up. But as a person who has a passion for teaching and education, as I know you do, I wanted to thank you for your time today and for all of the insight, perception and calmness that you brought to this radio show. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. And I really wish you nothing but the best in this upcoming year and in your career as well.
Thank you, Ritchie, and you too. All the best, and good luck with London as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'll need it. Join me next week on The Late Late Show, where I'll be joined by James Dean, an online educator, where we'll be discussing the impact of online education and how beneficial it can be. Thank you all for listening, either live or as a podcast on Teachers Talk Radio. I look forward to seeing you all next week. But for now, stay safe, take care, and see you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.